We're live. Good morning and welcome back to Sunday school. All right. What's up?
I was just trying to find either Miss Kim or my sister.
Well, your sister went that way before you did, and I haven't seen Miss Kim this morning.
Thank you.
All right, so anyways, welcome back. Got a new background coming. I mean, this is all nice, but I got another Van Gogh coming. Sunflowers. It's going to be really cool. So I'll have all four seasons. The Starry Night is a good winter time one. Van Gogh there. I've got a forest kind of early morning sunrise kind of forest thing I'll use in the fall. This is a good springtime one. And then the sunflowers make for good summertime. Come on in. So we are going to kick off revealing Revelation. Like I said, on Twitch, it's reading correctly, but because I'm using the selfie camera for Facebook, it's backwards. But Vacation Bible School starts next Sunday and runs, I believe, Sunday through Thursday or Friday. I don't know. Evenings from 6 to 8:30. So that's going to be tiring but fun. It's going to be good. I'm emceeing this year again, like I did last year. And so looking forward to having a good time with the kids on that. Shalom Shabbat yesterday started the Feast of Weeks. So that's we did that video a few weeks back, and that's going on right now this week for 7 days. Is the Feast of Weeks. So look into that, check it out. Like I said, we're going to do this revealing Revelation. Amir Tsarfati says on the back of this, he's a native Israeli and a former major in the Israeli Defense Forces. He's founder and president of Behold Israel, a nonprofit ministry that provides Bible teaching through tours, conferences, and social media. He's also been the governor of Jericho, that same Jericho over there in Israel, in the Middle East. He was also at one point a consultant, anti-terrorism consultant, traveling around, especially with his experience in the Israeli Defense Force. And so check him out. He's on Telegram. He's on Facebook. He's on a bunch of different social media sites, but check him out. Amir Tsarfati, A-M-I-R. This is his first name. Tsarfati is T-S-A-R-F-A-T-I. And he's written a book. He got together with Dr. Rick Yon, who is the former Dean of Biblical and Theological Studies in the Adult and Graduate Department for Colorado Christian University. He's written a whole lot of books, and he's still teaching in the bachelor's and master's degree programs there at Colorado Christian. So I guess he kind of was the biblical, for all the scriptural stuff Amir wrote the book, but he used Dr. Yon to help him with the citations and the scriptural stuff and then that sort of thing. Very similar to how Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins used to work together. And the reason I bring up Tim LaHaye is this is his commentary, Revelation Unveiled. This is a full, in-depth commentary. I won't say it's exactly verse by verse, but it is passage by passage. I've had this for a long time, and it's an excellent resource. If you're going to dig deep into Revelation and understand stuff, this is top-notch. Now, as my father-in-law recommended to me years ago when I started preaching and teaching Sunday school and stuff, if you're going to read a commentary by one author, then you should also read at least 3. So like this is Tim LaHaye's commentary on Revelation. Look up, Matthew Henry's or A.W. Pink's or Tozer or those are some of your older, more classic commentaries that are floating around out there. There's newer stuff, and that's kind of the reason for it. You want to have more than one opinion and compare notes and see if these guys all agree with each other, which makes it more likely that, if we're going to go with Tim LaHaye, if what he says coincides with or agrees with what Pink has written on Revelation, or Tozer has written on Revelation, or Spurgeon, then the chances are pretty good that you're on the right track. And so now this, Amir's book here is not a commentary. Doesn't mean don't read other books about Revelation, but it is, as he describes, it is a tour guide. And that's one of the things that his company here, Behold Israel, they do tour guides. They're tourism stuff, and they take Christians and Messianic Jews all over Israel, show them the streets where Christ walked and the different apostles walked, and there's different places over there in the Middle East they go to see where Paul, in Ephesus, where he stood up on the thing to try and stop a riot and actually made a bigger one in the process. And that's described in the book of Acts. But, there's a lot of really interesting stuff archaeologically speaking, that lines up with what the Bible says. Different places and different things. And so, Revelation, John was exiled to the Isle of Patmos, which is where they put the worst criminals or like political dissidents or anybody like that they wanted to get rid of. They stuck them out on this island, and they limited. They couldn't be in contact with. Nobody could visit. Apparently, they could send letters, but there was Roman guards there, and the worst criminals and the worst people there were stuck out there. Well, John, as the last surviving apostle of Christ, was put on the Isle of Patmos, and he was given the revelation. Now, we use the word Armageddon, and Armageddon is actually a Greek word, and it's interesting because there actually is the Valley of Megiddo, which is a real place, and Armageddon is a big word that basically means revealing. And so we say Armageddon to mean like some cataclysmic, they made movies, right? The big asteroid's going to hit Earth and it's going to cause Armageddon. Well, that's not a correct usage of the term Armageddon. Armageddon does not mean catastrophe. It means revealing, revelation. That's where we get the word revelation from. The translation of that into English, right? So this is something... Revelation is something a lot of people run from, a lot of people are scared of, a lot of people don't want to get into, because there's a tremendous amount of metaphor, there's a tremendous amount of symbolism, and it's, especially if you're not well versed in the Old Testament, if you don't know Daniel, and if you don't know Isaiah, and you don't know Ezekiel, and some of these other major prophets, whose writings their prophecies are fulfilled in the book of Revelation. And so Revelation is a futuristic thing. You're looking at it into the future. Christ revealed to John that this is what's going to happen. And then it's the fulfillment of stuff that has been talked about, not just by Christ in the Gospels to some degree, but by all the prophets in the Old Testament, right? So everything leads up to Revelation, and it's extremely important that we study this book and that we read it, and that preachers preach from it and teach from it, and Sunday school teachers dig into it, because as Roy has said, we need the full counsel of God, Genesis to Revelation. And so that's why this is important. And today we're going to go through the intro here. There is 21 chapters in this book, and they're divided up into 5 parts. And so you have Jesus and his church, which will be we'll start talking about next week. Then you've got part 2 is the journey to heaven, which is chapters 4 through 5. Then we'll get into the judgments, which is Revelation 6 through 18. Then the reign of the king, which is chapters 19 and 20, and then eternity, which is part 5, chapters 21 and 22. So that's going to be the breakdown, and I'm not going to promise that we'll do a chapter every time because there's a lot here. I mean, it's not a very big book. It's easy to read. If you want to pick up a copy, it just hit number 1 on the Evangelical Christian book list. They're available in Hobby Lobby, Walmart. They're selling out at Walmart. Of course, you know I got mine through Amazon. So they're in brick and mortar stores. They're online. You can go to Behold Israel, I think, and order directly from those folks. But I advise you go check this out. It's a good read. It's an overview. It's not meant to be some in-depth commentary. So we're not going to sit here and explain every little nitpicky thing. Like, I'll give you an example about this because I've been through, Roy did a Wednesday night Bible study series through Revelation. He did a chapter per night. So 22 weeks we did Revelation, and he did as best he could to go verse by verse through it and get into things pretty deep. But you're limited to 45 minutes on a Wednesday night with that. And then I've been through, I listened to a lot of it when John MacArthur was preaching through. He has an outstanding series called Avoid the Coming Night. I've never been able to afford to buy the CDs or the digital copies of all those sermons. It was $300 or $400 to get that, and that was years ago. So I don't know what that would be now, but excellent series. I've listened to the majority of that. We did, and this is what's funny, trying to get into, like, when you get into the nitpicky details. In my previous church, when we were doing a home Bible study one night a week, and we got into Revelation, and there's a part in Revelation where it talks about, it's in one of the judgments, and I'm sure we'll get to this later on in Amir's book actually, where it talks about these flying insects with like scorpion tails. They're covered in armor like horses, going into battle, but they have these beautiful faces and this beautiful hair, right? And I get into an argument with my former pastor over how big these things are. And truthfully, the book of Revelation doesn't specify how big they are. It says they are like horses. So could they be the size of a full-size horse? Maybe, but are we talking Clydesdale? Are we talking Mustang? What are we talking here? Palomino? I mean, what are we talking about? So could it be a Shetland pony? It's or a miniature horse. And I don't know enough about ponies and horses to tell you the difference in either one, but they're in the same family, obviously. I mean, donkeys fall in the same category too. So, anyways. But he believed that it really was the size of a horse, and I'm thinking it's like this kind of wasp thing with a scorpion tail, so I'm thinking something small, because they're stinging you all day long, right? So we're not going to sit there and have that kind of argument or discussion necessarily, but we're going to general overview of this. And one of the things that Amir Tsarfati writes is a lot of people have this idea that it's best to leave it to the professionals, they say. And of course, that being preachers, maybe Sunday school teachers, or some theologian in a university setting somewhere. The problem is most of us are not getting into this stuff, right? Most of us are not talking about it. And that's something else he says. Way too many people in the church are missing out on all the blessings that God himself promises to those who read it. So Revelation chapter 1, verse 3, blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and keep what is written in it, for the time is near. And now, the time is near confuses a lot of people. And there have been people for 2,000 years, including the apostles themselves, they really felt like this stuff was going to happen really, really soon. They thought that, we discussed that when we were talking about how we got the Bible, is they thought that, baby, you mark William on there.
I was thinking about
But they believed that Christ was going to come back during their lifetime, right? So they didn't write the Gospels down until they were about to die, really. They were that close to the end of their lives when they finally realized, hey, wait a minute, we need to write this stuff down because Christ hadn't come back yet. And so, like I said, Revelation was the last letter written by one of the apostles before the end of the apostolic age there. So as Amir says, it's not a commentary, this is a tour. So he also says, in a glorious moment on a rocky island, John was commissioned by Jesus Christ to send a letter to 7 of his churches. Some of the content was dictated by Jesus while John furiously scribbled. Some of it the apostle would witness firsthand, but all of it was a direct message from God to his people. So John is not the revelator. You hear that in churches. This is from John the Revelator. No. John was the scribe. Christ was the revelator. Christ was the one revealing all of this to him. He's the one giving him this prophecy. John was the scribe writing it down. And then he was shown all these wondrous things. And he was shown the judgments. And he was shown New Jerusalem and new earth and new heaven. He was shown all these things and he had to write it all down. And so that's kind of the thing that confuses a lot of people, is you have a human trying to explain these heavenly things from the aspect of how he best could describe it.
Wasn't John put into a deep sleep?
Well, I mean, he was...
I think his visions came to him in a dream, I think is what it was.
It could have been. He could have... But it also says he was taken up off the island. So I don't think it was an actual dream. I think he was... I mean, it could have been a physical taking him up and showing him all this stuff in heaven and putting him back. Or it could have been he was dreaming and, his spirit was taken up and shown all these things. That's entirely possible either way. I mean, it's still revelation by God, and that's the most important thing. So, like I said, the first 3 chapters, he was dictating from Christ. So he was actually in his little house thing, whatever, his little cave or whatever on Patmos, and he was able to write down everything. Because Christ, like I said, Christ is dictating to him this letter to the churches. And it's the 7 churches in Asia. Asia Minor, so places like Turkey and places, Ephesus. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. And that's, so these are churches, I believe, that John himself had actually started, had gone and planted these churches before he was in prison, which, the reason he was the last surviving apostle is this is the guy that Christ entrusted the care of his mother Mary to John the apostle. As he's being led to his crucifixion, he looks at his mother and says, "This is your son." He looks at John and said, "This is your mother," to make sure, which is interesting because, Jesus had brothers and sisters. that came after him. So, as a matter of fact, James, one of the apostles, was his brother, half brother, if you would. But he entrusted his mother to John. That's just the way Christ did it. But so John is the only one who died a natural death. The other, of course, we know Judas hung himself before he could become an official apostle after, he was never redeemed like Peter was, because he went and hung himself. But of the 11, and then you throw in Matthias, who replaced Judas. So John is the only one that died a natural death. The rest of them were all martyred. Peter was crucified upside down. Paul was beheaded. So I mean, it's just, so here he is. He's the last guy stuck on the Isle of Patmos because preaching the word of Christ in the middle of a bunch of Jews at that time was not a good thing to do. It interrupted and interfered with what the Jews had going on. So, let's see here. Amir Tsarfati also says this, yet there are believers who don't take time to read this letter, and there are preachers who refuse to preach it. That's amazing. And it really is. Like I said, like Roy said, and I said a few minutes ago, we have to take the full counsel of God. So we need to have, again, we have to understand Genesis. And I've taught through Genesis like 2.5 times now. And there's always something you see extra. And, but it really helps to understand how we got to where we are. And I don't mean like we're sitting here, because I mean, we're talking about 5,700 plus years. And from the time this stuff was written down 4,000 years ago. But either way, to understand the history, the beginning of time and the beginning of sin, because with Genesis, the first 11 or 12 chapters is how man screwed up God's creation. Well, then, first 11 chapters. Then chapter 12 through 52 is God establishing his plan for restoring his creation, to restoring man to him, to restoring us to where we can actually go in front of a pure and holy God. So, that's, if you don't understand that, then the rest of it doesn't matter how many prophets you read. It doesn't matter how many Psalms you read or Proverbs you read. No matter how many times you go through Kings and Chronicles. If you don't understand Genesis to some degree, then nothing else that has any context or any understanding. The meaning of the Gospels is lost because you don't understand why you even needed Christ to die for you in the first place. To truly understand what makes a sinner. And it's not just that you lied. It's not just that you stole or committed adultery in some form or fashion. It's that one single sin is all it took to condemn the whole human race to hell. And then you go back to Genesis, you got to understand that. And then once you realize that sin is sin, then you're able to fully understand why Christ had to die for us. And Revelation is the culmination of that. It is the ultimate, revealing of the character of God. He's not just some vengeful, God that wants to destroy everything and have wrath all the time and flood the earth all the time. Or punish his children. People get this view of God that he's just this mean, nasty curmudgeon hanging out up in heaven. And let me check on my little kids on earth, and I'm going to punish them. They need to be punished. There's a reason why God would punish Israel. And it wasn't just punishment, it was discipline. And there was always a purpose behind it. It's not just I'm mad and, like some drunken whatever, and I'm just going to beat you just cuz. No, every time God chastised his people, every time God chastises you and I today in some form or fashion, that brings us to repentance. That's the whole point, is to bring us back into obedience. God, something else you pick up on as you listen or read through the Old Testament is he would rather have obedience than sacrifice. And we get so caught up in the day-to-day stuff, and you have so many different religions that throw out this whole works-based thing. You can never do enough to earn salvation. You could never do enough to earn God's grace. It has to be given. It has to be given freely. God gives it freely to those of us who will accept that. And if you don't understand all this stuff, then there's no point even reading Revelation. And that's, what do you got? Critters up there or something?
I'm watching your wife. She's sitting there looking at the corners of the wall. Like,
no, I'm looking at the backdrops. I couldn't remember how many there were.
Between your wife and your daughter, they know how to make me laugh, I swear. The smallest things can make me laugh.
Well, he bought another one.
I said that at the beginning of class.
But you started 15 minutes early.
I started on time. Class starts at 9:45.
It starts at 10.
Class starts at 9:45. We start at 10 because we're late all the time. So there's a lot.
That makes me feel better that I wasn't late.
Look, if we're not late, we're not Baptists, okay? So, anyway, so get back into this. According to Amir, without reading this letter, you cannot know the Lord as he is today and has always been. There will be a gaping hole in your knowledge of his character. So, again, it's so important to read and study Revelation. You're scared of it. You don't understand it. There's weird stuff in there. Get you a commentary. Tim LaHaye does an excellent job. There's some other good ones out there. Most of the preachers I know have a copy of this. When Brother Roy went through our Wednesday night, everything that he said, and I don't know if he has this particular commentary or not, but what he was preaching and talking about and teaching lined up with what Tim LaHaye was saying. So that just, so if you're going to read it and you're curious about it, first and foremost, pray to the Holy Spirit that you can have understanding of this stuff, and that God will open the scriptures to you. But then get yourself a commentary to help with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure it's a good one. And like I said, it doesn't hurt to get 2 or 3 and compare what these people are saying. And most of you out there, most people, that's too much. I'm not going to do all that. Well, good luck. You have to rely on people like me who might get it wrong.
You have to rely on a man. Just know that a man will lead you astray.
Exactly.
That's what my grandfather used to tell me. If you can't figure it out for yourself, don't even try.
Well, the Spirit is the best teacher we've got. I mean, Christ said that when I go, I'm going to leave you. I have to go so that another one will come that will be a comforter, will be a teacher, will be a guide, So we have as Christians, we have the Holy Spirit. If you're not a Christian and you're watching this and you're like, you want to understand, because everybody's, looking like the world's going to end. Well, I got news for you. You're still not going to understand it.
No.
That was my father. I bought him this big, giant English Standard Version study Bible that I've got at the house somewhere. My stepmother gave it back to me after he passed away, but he had all these bookmarks in Revelation. And so we're talking about 10 years ago. He was thinking the world might be ending. And, here we are, we're still here 10 years later, and we're moving in that direction. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, Christ said it himself, no man knows the day nor the hour. There's things you're going to see happening, and again, Revelation gets into some of that. Most of that's in the Gospels, and most of that is in Daniel and Isaiah and that sort of thing. Revelation really is what's going to happen during the tribulation, what's going to happen leading up to the tribulation, what happens during the tribulation, what happens after the tribulation, what happens after the millennial reign of Christ. Well, what do you mean millennial reign of Christ? Well, again, having some reference from the Old Testament where Isaiah prophesies that there will be, all this stuff is going to happen. And, you know, it's helpful to know that so that when you get into Revelation, you go, oh, okay, there it is. Oh, that ties in with what Daniel said. That ties in with what Ezekiel said. That ties in with what Isaiah said. That ties in with what God said way back in Genesis.
The book of Ezekiel has a lot of knowledge in it, but it's also, to me, Revelations and the book of Ezekiel is probably the two most scariest books in the Bible. That'll make you, I don't mean like, you know, not that kind of scary, but I mean like, it'll make you stop and think about what it's really saying. You know, about the creatures and the way they move and stuff. I mean, it's gotta be, they've gotta be angels or sent from God, because nothing on this planet does that. So, I mean, Ezekiel and Revelations is wild. Revelations will make you sit and like, if you dig, like you said, you dig too deep into it, it'll make you want to pick it apart. Of why, how, when, where.
Well, there's a time for that, and I think understanding the Scripture is so important, but I think that we overcomplicate it sometimes.
Very much so.
And there's things that we should understand in Revelation. I mean, absolutely. But we can't, I mean, I've seen people get mad and like lose friendships or break up churches because this side of the church believed that Revelation says this and the other side believed it says that. And when you finally get down to the nuts and bolts of what they're arguing over, it's like, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
What does that have to do with salvation? That's something else. There's plenty of people out there who are throwing out theological things that I totally disagree with. To me, there's no biblical support for what they are preaching or teaching. And ultimately, though, and some of the people I know doing this are truly Christians. I have no doubt that they have salvation. The problem is they've gotten so bogged down in some of this minutia and some of this, you know, weird stuff. And all I can do is look at them and say, what does this have to do with salvation? Who cares about the Nephilim? Honestly, the Nephilim doesn't mean a flipping thing. They existed. The Bible mentions them. One day we'll fully understand exactly what they were and what role they played, if any at all, other than just being mentioned. But for crying out loud, how does that help people go to heaven if you're going to argue over the Nephilim? I mean, seriously, that's the, which leads into the rest of this intro that he does here. There's presuppositions, right? And he says this, presuppositions make all the difference when it comes to how we read. There's 4 primary presuppositional approaches to John's letter. And really, this can be applied to the whole entire Bible. But when it comes to Revelation, though, this affects people's commentary and belief in it, how they study it, if they study it, how they preach it, or if they even preach it. And so the first one is the preterist, which comes from a word meaning past. So the preterist views this book as history, as a symbolic picture of the early centuries of the church. Most preterists believe the book of Revelation was written between AD 64 and 67. And the events were fulfilled in the horrific year AD 70 when Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed by Rome. But to make that work, they are forced to allegorize or symbolize many of the chapters, like chapters 20 through 22, which talk about the New Jerusalem and the new heaven and the new earth. The result of this approach is that Revelation becomes a book of exaggerated, unsubstantiated history rather than a book of prophecy. And that's trying to understand prophecy as a whole. is you have to find where it has happened in history. And in order for it to be true prophecy, it has to come true, right? In order for a prophet to be a true prophet, the things that they prophesy have to actually happen. And so a whole lot of this we know, the major and minor prophets in the Old Testament, those things happen because we can find them in history. Mm-hmm. Problem with the book of Revelation is these things haven't happened yet. But if you say they have, then how, because there's people right now that'll say that we're in the millennial reign, we're in the millennium right now, which the millennial reign of Christ, as is described in Revelation, is the 1,000-year period where Christ sits on the throne in Jerusalem. All the promises to Israel are fulfilled. The land is fully controlled by the nation of Israel. Christ is the king, and for 1,000 years there's peace on earth. Satan is chained up and he's put in down in the pit. And so for 1,000 years there's peace. When have we ever had 1,000 years of peace for the last 2,000 years? When on earth have we ever had 1,000 years of peace? Ever. 57, almost 56, almost 5,800 years of history, of existence, according to the biblical timeline. When have we ever had peace? There's somewhere in the world is a war happening somewhere right now at this very moment in some country somewhere. There's a war happening. There's a rumor of a war. We got all the war drums are being beaten, and Russia is positioning themselves. Ukraine's getting their butt kicked all over the place as they're being invaded by Russia, and China's getting ready to invade Taiwan. There's all kinds of stuff going on. There's no peace. There's nothing to say that Christ is sitting on the throne. There's no temple in Jerusalem right now. So if you're going to say that this stuff has already happened, and so we're reading a book of history, that falls apart real quick when you actually apply some critical thinking. So if you believe that this is a book of history, then you're way off, and you're never going to fully understand it, and you're going to be confused, and you're going to confuse other people. So the next one is the Historist, which says that John's letter refers to the events and conditions of the church up through the millennia until now. Once you say that the Bible's words don't mean what they normally mean, then understanding it becomes a matter of one's own interpretation. So in other words, people will sit there and say that these things have already happened, and then they are allowed to just kind of make up their own religion, they make up their own interpretation of. That's why I say read more than one commentary. Read more than one book. This is good, but get a couple other books on Revelation and read and see and compare notes. Take the actual book of Revelation itself and read it. And, so people will twist it and people will use it to their own advantage to try and gain a crowd. They'll tickle your ears, so to speak. But again, if you read this, the revelation, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ that God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. It hasn't happened yet. Which brings up another point. We'll kind of get into this next week too. But when Peter says that one day is as 1,000 years to God, people don't understand that either, because people don't make the connection that God exists outside of space and time. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yesterday, today, and forever. How are you like that unless you exist outside of space and time and can enter into space and time at any given point you want to? That's why God, when he was there when you were a little kid, is the same as God as you are as an adult, and he's the same God as when you die and go to heaven. He's the same. He doesn't change because he doesn't age. So when he shows up at these different points in your life, then he's the same, right? So for Peter to say that, it doesn't mean that we're on this weird distorted time scale, and that for every day is 1,000 years, which would mean 365 days in a year times 1,000. So we're talking about what, 365,000 years in 1 year of Earth time. I'm not talking about like dog years, like for every year that every human year for a dog is 7 years. So if the dog's 1 year old, they're actually 7 in dog years. We're not talking about that kind of a thing. That's not, technically, I guess, age-wise, because they only live to be an average number of years. And so, but humans, if you were to say that every day is 1,000 years to God, then that would mean 365,000 years covered in a 1 year span of human life. So then, we want to get out their calculator and figure this one out. 5,738 times 365,000. Nobody wants to get it. Maybe you'll get a calculator out and figure that out, right? So that all of a sudden the Earth goes from being 6,000 years old to millions and billions of years old, right?
I'm ready now.
Wow. Okay, so 5,700, I think it's 38 times 365,000. $2,094,370,000. So if you use that,
I'll say 3 billion.
if you use that analogy that Peter gives us, that 1 year is 1,000 years to God, then we're talking about a potential 3 billion year old universe. Problem is the biblical timeline doesn't match all that, because we can only, even if that was the case, we can only perceive 5,738 years.
Yeah, but my question is, how long, God created the heavens and earth, and he created Adam and Eve, and he put them here, from dust to Adam, and from Adam's rib to Eve. But how long was that span between them and Jesus? And then you got his 34, 36 years before he had crucifixion. Okay, so we have that mapped. And then now we know from Jesus to today, but there's a gap between Adam and Eve to the time of Jesus' birth.
It's not really a gap. I understand what you're saying there. But according to the Hebrew calendar, we're on like 5,000, it's either 28 or 38. But we're on the year 5,700 and I think 38. You can Google that or search engine that and correct me there. But we've got 2,000 years from the birth of Christ, theoretically speaking, and it's off by a few years. It's not exact. Calendars have been changed. There was some point 10 years was actually completely removed by some Roman king, emperor guy. That's an interesting study to get into, is how we have the calendars that we have now. But assuming that everything kind of lines up pretty close to correct, we're talking about 2,000 years from Christ, and then if we're on the year 5,738, then that, you take that away from there, you have 3,738 years. And the best timeline they come up with is that the flood happened around 1,500 years after the garden. And so when the flood happened, from the flood to I forget exactly which point. I know I've got this in other videos that was from last year, but you end up, what happened at the 4,000 year mark? Because when you talk to a Jew and you say the flood, they know that that's 1,500 years after the garden. And then there's something else that happened at 4,000 years after the garden. And so To who?
I think it was Abraham or David.
Right, yeah. You get into David, I think, and that's like 4,000 years from. So, we have timeline stuff, and because we have the Gregorian calendar, which was basically changed by the Roman Empire, Greeks and the Gregorian, that's all that stuff, and even so when you get to Constantine, and he quote unquote converted, which led to the establishment of the Roman Catholic Church, they reset the calendar to the estimated time of Christ's birth, which is not known exactly. So it's kind of this, let me throw a dart and see where it lands and say that's because, Constantine was 300 years, almost 400 years after Christ. So, it's really difficult to nail down a time frame. And that's what I say, looking at this stuff and saying it's already happened, but then it doesn't explain how other things are going on when you take it into full context, and then you say, well, it's going to happen. Nobody knows when. Yeah, so it's difficult, which is why you have to let Scripture explain itself. You have to let the Spirit explain it to you. And then you have to read into the details and see that we, like I said earlier, when have we ever had 1,000 years of peace? That's prophesied in the book of Revelation. When have we ever? If you think we've had 1,000 years of peace at any point in our history, in human history, whether it's 6,000 years or 3 billion years, if you ever think that we've had 1,000 years of peace, your head is in a cloud somewhere, you're in a bubble, wake up. Mm-hmm. Look at the world around you, acknowledge it for what it is. It's going to hell in a handbasket. I said that 2 weeks ago when I was filling in for Brother Roy.
It is very quickly.
So then the third type of presupposition is the idealist, which says that Revelation is a grandiose picture of the great clash between God and Satan. I think like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, as good as it is C.S. Lewis's Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series. Good versus evil. In the end, good wins. We all breathe a sigh of relief and enjoy forever in the eternal kingdom. The problem with that is that the Bible isn't a work of fiction. It's truth. It's reality. It's prophecy. It's history. It's not fictional, though. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. And so if you look at it as, it's just good versus evil, that you miss out on so much, because there's so much more to it. Especially because the person that says that it's all good versus evil thinks that they're good. And, what does the Bible tell us? What does Paul say? There is none good, no, not one. None of us are good. That's why we need Christ. That's why we need salvation. That's why we need to be covered by the blood of Christ to be able to go before a holy and perfect God. So the preterist is wrong. The historist is wrong because they're trying to twist it to make it line up with whatever their agenda is. The idealist is wrong because they don't recognize their own sin. Because if it's all about good and evil, every one of us loses.
Big time.
Because none of us are good. And if we're not good, then what are we? We're evil. I'm not evil. How dare you say that? Sin is evil. If it goes against God, it's sin. If it goes against God, it's evil. God is the standard of what is good and what is evil. So if it's not for him, it's against him. If it's not for Christ, it's anti-Christ. If it's, so if you're not doing the things God wants you to do, then you're evil. Sorry, me included. Every sin you commit is an act of evil. Is it as bad as shooting up school? No, not necessarily. But again, all sin is equal in the eyes of the Lord. You understand that when you go back to Genesis, when the original sin wasn't eating a piece of fruit, the original sin was disobeying God.
He said, don't, and she did.
Exactly.
There you go.
So the final standpoint that Amir looks, the way he presupposes Revelation when he reads it, and I agree with him on this, is the futurist. And the futurist says that everything in chapters 4 through 22, except for a few signs that are clearly identified as such, talks about actual future events. So, like I said, chapters 1 through 3 is Christ dictating what to say to the churches. And then chapters 4 through 22 is your judgments. It's the things to come. It's how it's all going to work. How the end of days is going to happen. We entered into the end times the moment Christ was born. So we've been in the end times for 2,000 years, roughly. Give or take a few. Okay, so, but the end of days is different than the end of time. And the end of days is what Revelation is talking about. Pardon me.
I just sure wish that God would make a change in this world and people would absolutely let him. It's not the fact that God's not. He is. He's changing lives every day. Thank God for that. But it's people in this world that won't accept him and see the big picture of what he actually truly is doing. They want to deny him and walk away from him whenever he's been there the entire time, and all you have to do is just accept him. What he asks of us is so simple, so small. But what he done for us is greater than what we can ever do for him.
Absolutely. That is absolutely the truth. And so many people will, and again, you go back to Genesis. And God talks to Cain. Cain's upset that his sacrifice wasn't accepted and Abel's was. And
It's because he sold his birthright.
not yet. This is Cain and Abel, not Jacob and Esau. But you're on the right track. But for Cain and Abel, though, right? So Abel, this is right after the garden. So Abel makes his sacrifice, it's accepted by God. Cain makes his sacrifice, it's not accepted by God. Instead of Cain going, God, what do I need to do to get right here? He kills his brother. But before he kills his brother, God speaks to him and says, hey, dude, look, don't do what you're about to do. Sin is at your doorstep. It is crouching. It is ready to take you. He gives him this opportunity to repent, to choose the right path. And he doesn't take it. Instead, he kills his brother. And then when God confronts him with it, what have you done? He says, well, am I my brother's keeper? And he's, well, yeah. I mean, look, his blood is crying out to me from the ground. So God knew what Cain did. It wasn't, he wasn't just guessing. But even in the exposure of his sin, Cain's response to God was not to seek forgiveness. It was to whine about his punishment. God's sitting there saying, look, because you've done this, then you're going to wonder and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And he's like, this is going to be more than I can bear because people are going to want to take revenge on me for killing my brother. So it's not a oh Lord, please forgive me. It's a how dare you punish me like that. And what blows my mind is God being God, the full character of God, He gives them a mark so that nobody messes with them. He let him live. To give him a chance to get right. Of course, he never does, and those descendants are doing weird stuff, which is why the flood comes about. But, we don't... It's very difficult for us to correct ourselves just when somebody fusses at us. Usually there has to be some kind of pain involved. We have to be chastised. That's what the term chastise means. To discipline you, to inflict some sort of pain, mental, physical, whatever, some sort of pain to get you to get right with, Amir makes this comment in here that we have to be, it's like leading a horse around putting a carrot on a stick. God has to give us some incentive to do better. That's the way we are with our kids. You want your kid to act right? Hey, look, I'll take you for ice cream if you behave. You don't behave, you're not getting ice cream. You listen to weird stuff, I'll take away your laptop or your cell phone. I'm going to punish you because you didn't clean your room. You didn't do the things you were supposed to do. So we're going to, there has to be something there to make you feel remorse for what you've done. And that's the unfortunate thing for a lot of people, is that it's going to come down to basically heaven or hell. You're either going to burn in fire for eternity, or you're going to be in peace hanging out in heaven. Problem is, if you end up in the fire, it's eternal and there is no second chance. And so, what time is it? 10:42. All right. So the last thing he has in the intro is, he says this: but there is one central theme that carries through this wonderful letter of pain and hope, wrath and love, and judgment and grace. It is not a what, but a who. The book of Revelation is all about Jesus Christ. The whole entire Bible is all about Christ, and it's all about God and his plan for our salvation. And so, but the book of Revelation, period, is, again, John isn't the revelator, Christ is. John is the scribe. He's the one writing all this stuff down. But Christ is revealing himself, not just to John, because John was able to write this down and then send it out, 7 copies of this, to the 7 churches. And, we have this information now. Thousands of years later, we have the same information that John was given by Christ. We can see the culmination of the whole entire Bible. Revelation is, again, it shows you the full character of God. There's so many examples of God showing love to people that it blows my mind that someone can sit there and say that God is nothing but wrath. You're not reading the full Bible. You're not accepting what's written. You'll accept the part that says that God was going to flood the earth. You accept the part in Revelation where God's going to scorch the earth with fire to be made new. But you won't read the part where his son died on the cross for your sins. Or if you read the part where he died on the cross, you don't read the part where he was risen from the grave and restored his disciples and became the church. We all just want to sit there and cherry pick whatever we just feel like getting into because we don't want to admit our own sins. So, don't be scared of Revelation. Stick with me through this. It's going to be good. Amir's book it's easy to read. It's not some sort of grandiose scholarly work for people in college, for the experts, so to speak. He wrote this for the common person. Anybody out there at any level of Christianity can pick up his book and have an understanding of Revelation. So, be in prayer for William's dad as he deals with his health issues. Be in prayer for Vacation Bible School coming up next week. Again, remember, go back and watch my video. Check out some other stuff out there. Shavuot started yesterday. Feast of Weeks. And God bless. I will see you next time. Good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.